Episode 32. In 1932, the unemployment rate in the US was 25%, and it was a whopping 27% in Canada. I was 32 years of age when I started my first staff job as a radiologist, and the athlete to have reached 32 major championship finals is Novak Djokovic. Beyond MD, episode 32, here we go! Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Beyond MD podcast. Thank you for joining me again. Today is my third ever solo episode, and I'm going to be talking about a concept that is so vitally important to me and many other people out there. It is the concept, or even one can call it a mental trap, of the Arrival Fallacy. But before I get into definitions, I'm going to take a deep dive into my past and basically explain why I've been approaching life in the wrong way. And I'm also going to talk about how I've changed my mindset to help me live a more meaningful life in the present and the implications this has for our personal and financial lives. So I grew up, the early part of my childhood was in Bayvert, Newfoundland, a small little town in northern Newfoundland, about 5,000 people. My dad was a foreign-trained physician, and he was working at the hospital that you could see from our backyard. And I could see even from an early age, as a young boy, that my dad received fulfillment from his work. He could see that he was adding to his community, and he was happy working as a physician. And I looked up to him in a very positive light, and I told myself, maybe I want to head down this path as well. So from a very early age, as crazy as it sounds, I had in the back of my mind that I wanted to be a doctor as well. So my journey started in 2002 at Queen's University. I went to Queen's with the sole purpose of getting a spot in medical school. I was very focused. Most of my spares happened in the library where I was catching up on study notes or getting ahead on reading. Now, this isn't to say that I didn't have a good time, but I really did not want anything to distract me from what was next. And for me, that was medical school. So I ended up getting admission to the University of British Columbia, where I started in 2006. That was a wonderful experience, really important for me to leave my hometown of Kingston and get some life experience. I made wonderful friendships. We keep in touch with so many people today. But as medical school went on, and especially once third year, once clerkship started, I immediately started to think of what's next. And I knew I had to think about residency, so I came down on radiology and decided that now's the time to focus on the next step, and that is landing a radiology residency position. So I matched to Queen's University, went back to my hometown. That was a very eventful 5 years. That's where I met my wife, Seema Acharya, in PGY2. We got married in PGY4, and in my last year of residency, we welcomed our first son, Rohan, to the world. But as residency went on, my mind started to wander to the future again. I started to think, what's next? I need to figure out fellowship so I can land that eventual staff job. So towards the end of third year residency, I had to start thinking about what kind of fellowship I want to do. I applied, and then in fourth year, I ended up getting into the University of California, San Diego for a 1-year MSK fellowship. So Seema, Rohan, and I, we traveled cross continent, went to San Diego, and I think one of the defining moments for me was early on in my fellowship. To actually start working and start signing off cases with my staff, I had to get a social security number in the United States. And that's a very tedious process with all the paperwork. So my mind was fixated on that. I couldn't start my fellowship until I had my social security number. And I was so worried about that. But what I should have been doing early on was I should have jumped on the Amtrak and gone up the California coast. I should have enjoyed everything California had to offer. But I was so focused on landing that number so I could start my fellowship and pave the way to the eventual staff job. Anyways, fellowship went on. We had a lot of wonderful experiences. Now, I think I've mentioned before, I earned $10,000 that entire year. It was a very small stipend. But the year taught us many valuable lessons. And that was how to live frugally, focusing on what we value, spending money on what's important to us. And we grew a lot stronger as a family. Our bonds strengthened. We had no support system down there in San Diego. So for all those reasons, a very worthwhile experience. Now, the second sad but critical moment in my fellowship was in January. We were in Maui for vacation. And by that time, this was the midpoint of fellowship, I was really worried about landing a staff job because the job market in Ontario was extremely tight. So what I did was I asked the Ontario Association of Radiology, the OAR, to send me their spreadsheet of all their department heads. And I kid you not, I either cold called or emailed 75% of department heads across the province to find out if they would be hiring and if they'd be interested in meeting with me. And in fact, one cold call did not go well at all. The recipient of that cold call just shot back and said, "Who the heck are you and how did you get my number?" He was kind enough to have the conversation, but I can tell you in that moment, my mind again was thinking about what's next, when instead I should have been enjoying time on the beach building amazing memories with my wife and son. So I didn't get a job in Ontario, but I ended up in Calgary. Now, Calgary was a phenomenal experience. That's where I learned a lot about pain medicine. I learned a lot about musculoskeletal intervention. It's really shaped the way I practice today. And most importantly, I met amazing people, and I've tried to keep those relationships going. Now, one very memorable moment for us in Calgary was October 2016. I took Seema and Rohan to Lake Moraine, and I climbed up this cliff, and I got this perfect picture of that magical lake. And then far off in the distance, I could see Seema and Rohan playing by the water. For me, that picture, it's actually inspired a painting in our house that we cherish so dearly today. But that moment was all about living in the present. I was soaking it all in. I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget the picture of that lake. But that moment was short-lived because soon enough, I started thinking about what's next. I'm from Kingston. Seema's family was in Ontario. And we knew that down the road, we were going to be Ontario bound. We wanted family supports. So soon enough, I ended up applying to North York General Hospital. And that paved the way to where I am today. And I've been there for the last 5 years. Now, before I go on any further, I just want to reassure people that I am not a lame and boring individual. At each step of the way, I did have fun. But I can tell you that at each step of the way, I was thinking way too much about what's next. Whereas I could have done a better job living more in the present and enjoying what the present had to offer, soaking in the journey rather than constantly focusing on the destination. So my past, and I think for many other people, it can be summed up by one concept, and that is called the arrival fallacy. The arrival fallacy is the concept that the next step is going to be better than where we are today, and that getting to that next step is going to result in lasting happiness. I'm here to tell people that that is not true. That is not how life works. So I wrote about this on LinkedIn a little more than a year ago, and this rarely happens, but almost 10,000 people read the post. I had 136 people react to the post and like the post. I had people sharing the post, and I had people reaching out to me saying that I'm in medicine as well. Your message really resonates with me. Can we go for a walk? Can we grab a coffee? I just want to tell people thank you for reacting to my post, but most importantly, I'm really thrilled that the message resonated with you. So the concept of arrival fallacy, it was brought up by a speaker, a leader, an expert in psychology, leadership, and happiness. This is Tal Ben-Shahar. He's an Israeli-American speaker. He teaches at Harvard University, and his course at Harvard is the most popular course in Harvard's history. So why does the arrival fallacy happen? Why do we fall into this mental trap? Well, it's because humans by nature are goal-oriented and we are forward-looking. Think about this with yourself first, but then I encourage you to have conversations with your friends and your loved ones. Ask yourself and then ask them, do you spend more time thinking about the past, the present, or the future? I can tell you that I spend a lot of my time, and I can tell you that a lot of people spend time thinking about what retirement might look like, what that nest egg might look like, what their kids may be doing in the future, where they may be traveling in the future. We're constantly asking ourselves, what's next? But what we need to be asking ourselves is, why? Why are we doing something now? And how can we live more in the present to live a more meaningful life today? And it's my belief that doctors are more predisposed to the arrival fallacy. And I think this is a product of the way in which we train to get to where we need to be. Medical school is typically 4 years. Residency is anywhere from 2 to 5 years or more. It's often followed by a fellowship until you get to that staff job. Each step of the way is a process. Each step of the way we sacrifice so much for ourselves, for our family, to get to where we need to go. Therefore, I believe that physicians are very forward-looking. We're very goal-focused. We are very naturally focused on the destination, and I think we fall into this trap of the arrival fallacy, maybe more than the average person. Over a year ago, I was playing golf. I played 9 holes with 2 of my colleagues from my radiology department, and I told them about the arrival fallacy. They kind of looked at me with a quizzical expression at first, and they said, "What is that?" And so I summarized my journey. I summarized the concept, and one of my colleagues, who's a few years junior to me, he dropped his hamburger, and he looked at me and he said, "Yatin, you have summarized my life to a T." So is there a pathophysiological explanation for why we are predisposed to the arrival fallacy? And I promise that I will tie this back to finance. Go back to organic chemistry. Think about that chemical dopamine. What is the function of dopamine? And I have learned about this through reading, through discussion with people who are passionate in this space. And so let's just go back to the pandemic. I saw a lot of Amazon boxes at my doorstep in the pandemic. There were some weeks where I thought I was seeing one every single day. So you open the door, you see that parcel, you see that box, you get a bit of a hit of dopamine and you feel good. Now, does that dopamine high last? Of course not. Your dopamine levels eventually come down to a baseline level and then you don't feel as good anymore. So when Paul and Jane Healy on the last episode said, when you buy things, it doesn't usually result in lasting happiness. That happiness is fleeting. It may last a few days. So then naturally, to get back to that higher level of dopamine, we feel inclined to do more, to buy more, to obtain more things. And this happens from a very early age. I can tell you that when my boys get new Pokemon cards, they're really excited early on, but then a couple days I see the cards on the floor, and then the question is, "Dad, can I get a new pack of cards?" So how do we fight this tendency to buy more things, to get more things, which results in a hit of dopamine, which results in a sense of euphoria? Now, this is from one of our physician colleagues, Matt Pointer. He runs a course. He's very passionate about these concepts. We become friends. And I heard him talk about this in a podcast. And it's practical, simple advice. But before buying something, he said, maybe wait a little bit. Train your body to wait a little longer. By doing that, you'll condition yourself to be a bit happier with a lower level of dopamine, and you won't necessarily be relying on those big dopamine hits. And the last thing I will say about dopamine is that it is also the chemical that spikes when we experience something new, something novel. So even when you're sitting on the couch and you're thinking about that dream trip to Europe or what you're going to be doing in your retirement, well, dopamine spikes when you think like that. So dopamine, in fact, surges when we think about the future. And that's why we're so inclined to think about what's next rather than immersing ourselves in the present. All right, let's take a break from organic chemistry with a quick message. Today's episode features taxpay.ca. TaxPay is a one-stop shop online where you can schedule all of your tax payments. Or even better, you can invite your accountant to the platform to set up all your payments for you. This includes personal tax, payroll remittance, corporate tax payments, and GST and HST. The beauty is that you remain in control at all times and you can cancel or reschedule any payments on the platform. So I've been using this platform for several months now, and I can say that it's a breeze to use, secure, and the customer service is exceptional. I also learned this year that I am now classified by the CRA as an accelerated remitter. More on the technicals of this in another episode, but it basically means that the CRA wants me to pay my monthly remittance by the 10th day of each month. Had I known this in time and scheduled payments through taxpay.ca, I would have saved several thousands of dollars in penalties. But you live and you learn. I believe TaxPay can help you simplify your life, forget the stress of tax, eliminate potentially hefty penalties, all so that you can focus on the more important things in life. You can sign up for TaxPay today using the discount code BEYONDMD, that's BEYONDMD, on the pricing page to get 6 months for free. You can do this by visiting taxpay.ca, that's taxpay.ca. I have a link in the show notes that will take you to a series of screenshots on how to get started. And now, back to the episode. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit now and talk about how can we move away from this arrival fallacy, this mental trap, and how can we live a more purposeful and meaningful life in the present? What are some fixes? In my opinion, the easiest way to live life in the present and stop thinking about what's next is to take a step back and try to live more of your life through the eyes of your children. This is the quickest fix in my opinion. And I can tell you that for me, this was very real and very powerful this spring. So I'm a big hockey fan, as many of you know, and I've gotten my boys into it. And we spent so many evenings in the playoffs this year watching our favorite teams, watching our favorite players on TV. My boys would be beside me on the couch. They'd be asking me questions about players, asking me stats, asking me about the rules of the game. And I was fully immersed in the moment, sharing a passion of mine with them. And that's one of the most gratifying experiences. In the wintertime, I took the plunge and decided to coach Rohin's soccer team for 24 weeks. It can be tough dealing with the kids, dealing with the parents, but we found our groove and I saw him blossom from a kid who was once tentative on the soccer field into a kid who has fully embraced the game. And a very proud moment for me as a parent was he recently got invited to try out for his local rep team. And so now we're full on soccer. But living life through the eyes of your children, it can really teach you to immerse yourself in the moment. And it's a very rewarding experience. Practicing gratitude is a big one. A lot of people will talk about gratitude journaling. It doesn't have to go that far, but as long as you take a few moments every day to be grateful for something, and it could be something really simple. Examples for me are, I'm grateful for having good health. I'm grateful for the chance to take my son to soccer practice today. A few psychologists many years ago did a study where they had a set of younger patients and they've divided them into two groups. Group A practiced gratitude journaling for 10 weeks. Every day they wrote about something they were grateful for on paper. Group B was in fact told to do the opposite. For 10 weeks, Group B wrote down things that irritated them every day for 10 weeks. At the end of 10 weeks, Group A had significantly higher happiness and fulfillment scores. The third way to move past the arrival fallacy, to stop thinking about what's next and to live more in the present, is to set yourself up with mini goals. This is a concept that I learned about by following Jay Shetty, who's a storyteller and an influencer. He has an amazing podcast called On Purpose, which I highly recommend. But it's all about setting up smaller goals that are attainable in a shorter amount of time. And when you reach those goals, give yourself a pat on the back. An example for me is when I set out to create a podcast episode, it's a process. I have to research a topic. I have to line up a guest. Then I have to record. And sometimes, depending on the episode, I have to edit the episode. So if I divide each of those up into mini steps, mini goals, once I accomplish one, I give myself a pat on the back before I move on to the next one. What approach do your favorite athletes use? My favorite hockey player is Sidney Crosby, and my favorite golfer growing up was Tiger Woods. For them, it's one shift at a time, one shot at a time. Rather than always focusing on that end goal, focus on small steps that are attainable in the near future. Relationships is a big one. This is step number 4, to live more in the present. What I try and do is once in a while, I will connect with a colleague at the hospital. I will say, let's go grab a coffee. And in those meetings, I will shut my mouth and I will listen. And if you do this, you'll be surprised at how much you learn. And looking back, had I done more of this, had I just really focused on the conversation in front of me, I realized I would have learned so much more at each step of the way. When it comes to relationships, also remember the people who have had a positive impact on you. When I go back into my career path, I think about Dr. Donald Resnick, who I spent time training with in my fellowship. So I've made it a point of action to keep in touch with him to this date. Now, he told me something as I was leaving fellowship. He said, Yathin, I'm going to tell you something. Please don't forget this. The fellows are my family. I don't have kids, so you guys are my kids. And when fellowship comes to an end, 50% of my fellows I will never hear from again. 30% of you I will hear from for a letter of reference because you're applying for a new job. And then 20% of you will genuinely keep in touch with me. So I've made it a point to keep in touch with him. I've thoroughly enjoyed the relationship. And anytime I need to be bailed out on a complicated case, I'll send him a picture. He's always more than thrilled to respond. For me, it's very meaningful. It gives me a lot of happiness. One of my mentors in medical school on my journey to radiology was Dr. Savas Nicolau, who's the director of emergency and trauma radiology and now head at Vancouver General Hospital. He did a lot for me to get me to that radiology residency. So the impact he had on me, I've never forgotten. And so I've kept in touch with him to this day as well. The last thing I'll say about relationships is if you're thinking about somebody and maybe you haven't reached out to them in a while, stop in that moment, send them a message, send them a text message. It's so easy to do now. If you do that, you'll feel good, they'll feel good, the relationship continues, and that is a simple and beautiful act. Now, the 5th way to stop thinking about the future constantly and to live more in the present is to figure out your purpose. Figure out what helps you get up in the morning, what makes you tick. For me, I have a lot of things that need to be met, so I need my personal health. I need relationships with my family, my friends, and my mentors. I obviously need some level of financial stability, but then the fourth thing I need is a purpose. I need to wake up in the morning and know that I'm going to do something that's going to add some value to the world, that's going to bring meaning to the people around me. So I encourage everybody, take a step back, think about what your purpose is. What is your why? And focus on that. I can tell you it took me a long time to find out what my purpose is. And my purpose includes things like waking up every day and treating each day as an opportunity to learn. Making this podcast so that I can continue to bring something useful to the world. And then instilling these attributes in my children and doing everything I can to raise them in the best way possible. All right, so now to the finance. Let's take some of these concepts and apply them to a financial situation. So for this example, let's take two doctors. And for simplicity, let's assume that both doctors are incorporated in Ontario. And let's assume that both doctors are going to take their retained corporate income at the end of each year, and they will invest it and generate a 6% average annualized return for 20 years. Doctor number one earns $250,000 annually into the corporation. Doctor one pulls out $125,000 from the corporation gross salary for their cost of living. This leaves $125,000 in the corporation. After the small business tax rate, this doctor is left with $110,000 of retained corporate earnings. They invest this, 6% annualized returns for 20 years. This results in a nest egg of $4.4 million. If this doctor continues to spend just $125,000 a year for the rest of their life, how far will $4.4 million take them? Easily 35 years. And let's not forget that that $4.4 million will continue to grow over time. Let's move over to Doctor 2. Doctor 2 has a higher corporate income, $500,000 a year. But Doctor 2 has a different lifestyle. Doctor 2 pulls out $350,000 from the corporation every year to fund their lifestyle. This leaves $150,000 in the corporation. After the small tax rate in Ontario, $132,000 of retained corporate earnings to invest. 6% annualized for 20 years results in a nest egg of $5.3 million. If Doctor 2 continues to spend $350,000 a year for the rest of their life, how far will $5.3 million take them? 15 years? 20 years? Maybe a little more, assuming that money continues to grow? So what happened here? Even though Doctor 2 earned more, and even though Doctor 2 had more absolute earnings retained in the corporation at the end of each year, they will reach financial independence later than Doctor number 1. So the take-home message here is that it's more important to think about the relative amount that you're saving, a percentage of your gross salary, rather than the absolute dollar amount that you're saving. So I think it's very clear from these examples that people spend in different ways. People spend on different things. People have different needs. But hopefully, these spending habits come from a desire to live true to one's core values rather than knee-jerk reactions or a desire to keep up with the Joneses or a fear of missing out. So to understand how people spend, we can break it down into 4 major categories on a pie chart. The first category is housing. Then we have cars and transportation. Then we have food, and then we have other. And under other expenses, let's include things like clothing, healthcare, education, and travel. So I think it's pretty clear, if one spends excessively in all 4 categories, it's easy to wind up in the same situation as Doctor 2 from the last example, where you're not leaving very much money behind, or you're leaving a smaller amount, a smaller percentage of your overall income behind to invest and grow. And we can see from that example, if you do that, then you'll have to work longer to reach the same level of financial independence. Now, some people love their work, some people want to work, but there's a difference between having to work and wanting to work. So I can tell you right away that I do not have this all figured out. But I look at this pie chart and I decide what categories here are most important to me, what are of greatest value to me, and I choose to spend more time and money there. So I'm from Thornhill. I live there. I live in the GTA. So naturally, housing is more expensive. I really have no choice there. Now, in the pandemic, we decided to transition to private school. Honestly, I didn't think it was going to happen this early for us, but it's a decision we decided to make. And it's one that's worked out really well for us so far, thankfully. And so looking at it, investing in the education, the happiness, and the well-being of my kids, that is a top priority without a doubt. So that category in the pie chart that we labeled as other, well, we're oozing cash there as well. But then other things have to give. I can't spend in the other quadrants. So for me personally, I do not place high value on driving expensive cars. I want to get from point A to point B. So I don't spend much on a car. I also don't eat out very much. My lunches are brown bags. I take leftovers from the night before every single day. But I do that because not only is it easy on my wallet, but I know what I'm putting into my body. And that's important to me too. I value good health, good eating habits. Now, we're also blessed to have a Miele coffee machine at home, and this was given to us as a housewarming gift. I take coffee most days to work. I love the taste of coffee from that machine. I get to pick my beans. It's amazing. But the jury's still out on whether that saves money. I think somebody did make a very interesting post on Physician Financial Independence about making your own coffee versus buying it outside, so I'll have to go back and review that post. But this is not to say that eating out or driving expensive cars is a bad thing. I have colleagues who love to collect cars because this adds value and meaning to their life. And if you're one of those people, then you should be spending in those areas. It's a personal decision. The only way we know what's important to us is if we take a step back and we figure out how do we live life according to what we value. Now, the other category that I do like to spend on as well is travel, because travel results in a lot of enjoyable life experience and it allows myself to create memories with my family that we're going to remember for a lifetime. I place a lot of value on that. But how I travel is important too. So one thing I don't value at this point in my life is traveling first class, because I know what's going to happen is we're going to get on the plane, my kids are going to put on their headphones, watch their iPads for 4 or 5 hours, and then we're there. So there's really not much value in us forking up 3 times the amount of money to travel first class. But that could change down the road. Seema and I may want to enjoy that experience later when we can truly make the most of the first class experience. And the other reason I don't do this right now is that I want my kids to be grateful for basic things. I want them to learn the value of hard work, the value of a dollar, and to understand that life is a process and that it takes time to get places. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and I really hope that the discussion on the arrival fallacy was one that will resonate with people, because I truly do believe there are many people in medicine and in all walks of life for that matter who have experienced this. And I hope that the ways that I talked about on how to fight the arrival fallacy will be impactful. So we talked about 5 ways. Number 1 is viewing life through the eyes of your children. If you are blessed enough to have kids, take advantage of this. It's very, very powerful. Number 2 is practicing gratitude. Number 3 is setting up smaller mini goals before the final destination. Number 4 is your relationships. This includes current relationships, learning from the people around you, and also acknowledging the people who got you to where you are today. And number 5 is making sure you understand your purpose, making sure you understand your why. I truly hope that these points will help people to live more in the present. And I think if we do that, we will gain a deeper understanding of what our core life values are. And only through that will we ensure that we are living life in sync with our core values. Ultimately, I believe this is what leads to our purpose, this is what leads to happiness, and this is what leads to more financial stability in the long run. Thank you so much for joining me again. We have so many exciting episodes in the pipeline right now. We've got pre-construction condos, many more real estate episodes, GICs, charitable gifting, more episodes on the markets, and I'm really excited to bring this all to you. Reach out to me anytime, beyondmdpodcast@gmail.com or on LinkedIn. Follow me on social media, connect with me, please give me feedback, and please follow the podcast. Give it a rating or review. And if you like what you're hearing, please feel free to share this podcast with a few people who you think could benefit as well. Until next time, stay well and stay savvy.